In the Invincible comics, there are a lot of shocking deaths, but none of them hit quite like Cecil Stedman. And today, we're breaking down the tragic life and death of the man who ran the world from the shadows. Okay, so Cecil Stedman was the director of the Global Defense Agency, also known as the GDA. And for context, the GDA is a secret organization whose entire job is to protect Earth using any methods necessary. And when I say any methods, I mean literally anything. If it means keeping the planet safe, Cecil was willing to do it. Now, Cecil wasn't always this way. Back when he was a field agent, he actually had what people called a Boy Scout mentality. He believed in doing the right thing and following the rules. But that all changed after one mission where he got exposed to a chemical weapon known as Chemical X. This stuff was basically a flesh-eating substance that nearly killed him, and although he survived, his entire body was left covered in scars, to the point where he needed artificial skin just to function normally. That experience broke something in him, because Cecil realized that playing by the rules gets people killed, and from that point on, his whole philosophy became, the end justifies the means. Over the years, Cecil became known for operating in the gray area of morality. He was the guy willing to get his hands dirty so that heroes like Invincible could stay clean. In fact, there's this idea that perfectly sums up his character. You can be the good guy, or you can be the guy who saves the world. You can't be both. And Cecil chose to save the world, even if it meant people saw him as a manipulative control freak. Despite all of this, though, Cecil did care about people in his own way. And there were moments where you could see that he wasn't just some heartless government agent. He was a man who believed he was doing what was necessary to protect humanity. The problem is that this belief led him to make some pretty questionable decisions, and one of those decisions would eventually get him killed. Now, to understand why Cecil's death was so tragic, we need to talk about his relationship with Robot. Back in Season 1, Cecil handpicked Rudy to lead the new Guardians of the Globe. Out of all the heroes on Earth, he trusted Robot the most, and Rudy even promised not to let him down. Following that, the two of them worked together to stop invasions, handle disasters, and basically keep the planet safe. Sure, they disagreed on certain things, but there was always this mutual respect, and later in the comics, Cecil gave Robot control over every superhero team on Earth, which is insane when you think about it, because that's a level of trust you only give to someone you believe in completely. What Cecil didn't know is that Rudy had changed drastically as a person, and the reason for this goes back to when Robot and Monster Girl got trapped in the Flaxen dimension. For context, the Flaxen dimension is this alternate reality where time moves way faster than it does on Earth. So while they were gone for what seemed like 10 months to everyone else, they actually spent over 1,000 years in that dimension. During that time, Rudy went from being a hero to a prisoner to an emperor. And all of those experiences warped his mind to the point where he started to believe that the only way to truly save Earth was to rule it himself, just like he ruled the Flaxens. When Robot and Monster Girl finally returned to Earth, Cecil had no idea what they'd been through. He thought they were fine, and so he continued trusting Rudy with more and more responsibility, giving him access to top-secret information, and even letting him manage global security. Unfortunately, this trust is exactly what allowed Robot to plan his takeover, because he used everything Cecil gave him to build an army of drones and position himself to seize control of the entire planet. Issue 111 is when everything falls apart. Mark finally exposes Robot's evil plan, and Rudy's response is to just start killing everyone who might stand in his way. Sadly for Cecil, he was the first victim. Robot's throat, and then, while Cecil was bleeding out, dying on the ground, crushed his skull to finish the job. In terms of physical pain, this death was brutal, but it was also pretty quick, so Cecil didn't suffer for as long as some other characters in the series. What can't be ignored, though, is the emotional suffering, because we can only imagine how betrayed he must have felt.
Think about it for a second. Cecil had spent years building the GDA, protecting Earth and making impossible decisions to keep everyone safe. And in his final moments, he's being murdered by the one person he trusted more than anyone, the same person he gave the keys to the kingdom to. And the worst part is that Cecil knew it was his own fault. He's the one who gave Robot all of that top secret information. He's the one who put Rudy in a position of power. So his last few seconds of life must have been filled with just deep deep regret. For me personally, I expected Cecil to either survive till the end of the series or die during a Viltrumite invasion. You know, go out fighting against an alien threat or something like that. But instead he gets murdered by his own protege, which is honestly way more tragic. Now, if you thought his death was bad, his funeral was somehow even worse. Sometime after Robot's takeover, Mark and Eve finally convince Rudy to hold funerals for the people who died during his coup. And this includes heroes like Black Samson, Knockout, and Kid Thor, as well as Cecil. But here's the thing. At Black Samson's funeral, at Knockout's funeral, at Kid Thor's funeral, there were people who showed up to pay their respects. But at Cecil's funeral, there were only 3 people: Mark, Eve, and the priest. That's it. Now, to be fair, most of the people who would have attended Cecil's funeral were either in captivity or missing in action thanks to Robot, so it's not like they had a choice. But even Robot himself didn't show up. And that's what makes it so messed up, because Rex attended the funerals of Black Samson, Knockout, and Kid Thor. But he couldn't be bothered to show up for Cecil, the man who trusted him more than anyone, the man who gave him everything he needed to take over the world. Standing there at that empty funeral, Mark starts to think differently about Cecil and about Robot. Because knowing Cecil the way he did, Mark realizes that Cecil probably would have worked with Robot despite everything Rudy had done. At the end of the day, Robot had brought peace to Earth. He'd ended wars, provided free healthcare, and turned the planet into a paradise. And from Cecil's perspective, that's the greater good. That's exactly the kind of morally gray decision he would have made. In a way, Cecil's death forced Mark to see the world through his eyes, to understand that sometimes saving people means making choices that no one else is willing to make. And although Mark didn't agree with everything Cecil did, he finally understood why he did it. Overall, Cecil Stedman was a man who sacrificed his morality, his reputation, and eventually his life to protect a world that never fully trusted him. He operated in the shadows, made the hard calls, and did whatever it took to keep Earth safe. And in the end, he was killed by the person he trusted most, buried with almost no one there to remember him. For me, that's one of the most tragic endings in the entire series, because Cecil deserved better than that. But at the same time, it's kind of fitting for a guy who always said, "The end justifies the means." So guys, I know this is a different type of video than my usual explainer video. I was just going through Invincible comics and I see how underwhelming Cecil's death is, so I had to make a video on it. And as always, thanks for watching.